Welcome to this explainer. You know, deep within the scholar's archives lies this incredibly dark, mythological tragedy of a figure known as Marchocias. Now, if you're already familiar with the Ars Goetia, you probably just categorize him as the 35th spirit, right? A great and mighty Marquis. But we aren't going to look at him as just some traditional demon of battle today. Instead, we're dusting off these ancient records to construct a character profile for what might just be the ultimate tragic anti-hero. We're going to look way past the superficial fire and fangs to examine the profound, agonizing conflict between strict martial duty, personal morality, and the lingering, inescapable ghosts of fallen nobility.
We absolutely have to begin our investigation with his defining philosophy, which is this: an oath is a wound that chooses not to close. Just let that sink in for a second. That single phrase causes a massive paradigm shift in how we understand him. I mean, think about what a wound like that truly feels like. It's a constant, throbbing ache. It demands your attention every single day, right? This tells us right off the bat that we're not dealing with a mindless beast driven by chaos or random violence. Instead, we're looking at a figure defined entirely by the heavy, agonizing burden of unbroken loyalty. His primary motivation isn't greed or bloodlust. It's a terrifying sense of duty. And as we'll soon discover, that rigid duty is exactly the thing that tears his very soul apart.
Picture this. Imagine the sheer chaos of a routing army, the screaming, the mud, the overwhelming terror of imminent defeat. Then, when we dig into these ancient journal entries, they describe the heavy black smoke parting. He descends, dragging this massive serpent tail, with his jaws glowing from within with a suffocating coal-red light. But honestly, the most crucial detail in these texts isn't his terrifying appearance. It's actually the reaction of the men. The soldiers don't scatter. The text notes that something in the creature commanded the old discipline right down in their bones. The sheer weight of his presence forces cowardly men to stand, to hold the line, and to remember their oaths. He's literally the living embodiment of a sworn blade, radiating this ancient, unyielding order.
So, that brings us to the central mystery of our research. Can a creature made of absolute battlefield violence still harbor a memory of heaven? It's a paradox that completely defines his existence. Marchocias forces us to reconcile his terrifying, monstrous physical form with the fading honor of a fallen realm. He stands squarely on the bleeding edge between monster and knight. He's a guardian who has seemingly forgotten how to protect with absolutely destroying everything in his path, and yet he desperately clings to the memory of what it meant to be pure.
Now, the mythology introduces a really tragic ticking clock into his narrative, known as the 1200-year oath. Marchocias actually deeply believes his exile has an expiration date. He fights with this relentless conviction that he's eventually going to be restored to his divine throne. But scholarly interpretation reveals a profoundly cruel twist here. The promised return isn't just a matter of patiently waiting out the clock. It ultimately culminates in a trial where this absolute master of war must, for the very first time in his entire existence, refuse a battle. It proves his violence is bound by a desperate, tragic hope for restoration, which makes every single act of war he commits a painful, contradictory step toward an impossible peace.
To properly study this myth, we really need to analyze his physical form, almost like an art historian dissecting a classical painting. Because he isn't painted in the muddy colors of mere savagery. Instead, his visual palette is deliberately regal but war-torn. He's styled in charcoal black and ember red, rounded out by storm gray and ash white. He looks like a noble beast standing all alone on a ruined battlefield at dawn, just surrounded by falling ash. And then there's the tarnished gold. That motif represents exactly what he is, something deeply precious and divine that has been slowly, methodically corrupted by the endless, suffocating grime of warfare.
And here is where his anatomy gets really fascinating. He possesses these grand Griffin wings, which are a tragic, highly visible reminder of lost divine nobility, ascent, and solar guardianship. They suggest he was once meant to patrol and protect the heights of heaven. Yet, inevitably, trailing behind those majestic wings is a massive serpent tail. The tail represents the hidden, lingering consequence of conflict. It's the cunning, the bitterness, and the lasting poison left behind by warfare. So even when he charges nobly forward, soaring on those wings of honor, that heavy tail reminds us that every single violent act, no matter how politically justified it seems, leaves an incurable poison in its wake.
Oh, and we definitely have to talk about his base form, the wolf. Now, in human folklore, the wolf frequently suggests hunger and brutal survival, sure. But more importantly, it represents pack loyalty and deep territorial instinct. You see, Marchocias is never a solitary lone wolf shadow. By appearing in this form, it completely cements him as a commander driven by the deep, instinctual psychology of allegiance. Think about what that actually means for a human army that chooses to follow him. It represents the dangerous, intoxicating comfort of belonging entirely to a warband or a grand cause. His ferocity isn't wild or unhinged at all. It's highly disciplined, strictly regulated, and focused entirely on the survival of the pack.
So, how does a creature so steeped in war actually communicate? Well, the archives give us this absolutely chilling answer. Truth is not a mercy. Truth is a blade without a handle. Marchocias is traditionally associated with giving true, unfailing answers, but for a fallen warrior, truth isn't comforting or liberating. Think about what a blade without a handle actually does in practice. It shreds the hand of the person wielding it just as deeply as it cuts the enemy it strikes. His absolute, uncompromising adherence to truth is his most terrifying weapon, far sharper and far more devastating than his claws or teeth could ever be.
We see this concept taken quite literally in the historical records, which frequently state that he breathes fire. But symbolically, what is that? This destructive fire represents his truthful answers. When Marchosias speaks, it is a literal act of devastation. The truth burns away all falsehoods, all political delusions, and all those comforting little lies generals love to tell themselves. It arrives not as a revelation, but as a severe wound. If a commander asks him how to finally win a brutal war, the fiery truth might be that securing victory will require sacrificing the very soul of their entire nation.
And all of this creates a paralyzing internal struggle for him. It's a profound friction between the action taken and the unavoidable consequence. As the wolf with wings, he might execute a flawless, tactically brilliant victory for his summoner. The action itself is perfect, but the consequence? The survivors are forever haunted, completely unable to forget the absolute monsters they had to become in order to secure that win. Or, acting as the commander of Ash, he delivers flawlessly truthful advice to generals, only to reveal the bleakest reality of civil war. Both sides are guilty, and victory simply goes to whoever is willing to lose their humanity last.
And honestly, herein lies the true depth of our ruined champion. He understands the cold, grinding machinery of war far too well. He knows intimately that courage can easily curdle into dark vanity. His greatest strength, his absolute refusal to betray a command once it's formally accepted, becomes his absolute doom. His strict obedience is a horrific curse when his fading, desperate honor forces him to serve clearly evil commands. He can't rebel. He can't just walk away. He is entirely trapped, a prisoner of his own unbreakable word.
This agonizing loyalty is beautifully illustrated by a fascinating, dark, archival hook known as the Fallen Standard. The ritual is deceptively simple, almost like a ghost story whispered in military camps late at night. First, the summoner has to touch a torn, burning battle flag that is somehow never consumed by the flames. Second, Marchocias manifests and provides exactly one unfailingly truthful answer to a question. But the third step? That's the devastating catch. Hearing that unvarnished truth actively forces you to vividly confront the darkest, most terrible thing you have ever personally done in the name of duty. It turns his mythology completely around, focusing the harsh light directly onto the person seeking his destructive wisdom.
So, in this way, Marchosia acts as a highly dramatic mirror for human leaders. He forces us to heavily contrast the noble virtues of the warrior against the creeping corruption of the command structure. Marchocias possesses genuine courage, unbreakable loyalty, and sharp martial clarity. Yet because he absolutely refuses to break an oath, those bright virtues are harnessed by the vanity of others, twisted into an obedience to evil, and weaponized as merciless violence. He basically forces us to ask ourselves a terrifying question. When exactly does loyalty stop being a virtue and start being a toxic, deeply corrupting force?
Which brings us to the ultimate verdict of our explainer today. Think about this. If a warrior is fiercely, unquestionably loyal, but the command he serves is inherently corrupt, is he a hero or is he a villain? Does his rigid, forced obedience to a dark order make Marchosia a monster, or does his agonizing internal conflict, his continuous punishment by his own strict code of honor, and his desperate, fading hope for a return to the divine, make him the ultimate tragic hero? It is the silent question buried beneath every battlefield in history. So I want you to think about that the next time you hear someone demand absolute, unquestioning loyalty. Thanks for joining me on this dive, and keep questioning the archives.